great to see a nice young audience in Delhi attending the festival. All the dignitaries on the dais, Mr. Gupta, Ms. Haider, Mr. Varma, Mr. Kiran, Karnik, thank you all for being here. Mr. Karnik has been a supporter, a mentor, and advisor to me, not just for this festival, but for many, many years now. And he was one of the first people I called up when we thought about the festival, and I said, I'm thinking of doing something in non-fiction. And there was a pause, and he said, what a brilliant idea, without even, hearing anything else. He just heard the sentence, and he said, this is brilliant, just go ahead and do it. And, sir, thank you so much for your support in, seeing this festival through. Mr. Liberhan, thank you so much for partnering with us, and you've got a very supportive team, a lovely venue, and we hope we'll have a good two-day festival here. I won't take more than another minute because I have nothing sensible to speak with such a lovely list of speakers here. Just want to delve into why we started the Non-Fiction Festival. We believe we are a young country, we're a young economy, a young society, not just because we have a lot of youth and because of the demographic dividend which is being spoken of, but we're a young republic. We've been around for about 66, 67 years. There's a lot that we need to discuss, debate, critique, things that should matter to us as people, whether it's in politics, economics, governance, societal issues, welfare. And we don't find any platforms to do that. So that's around the discussion debate. Neither do we find platforms where such content is celebrated. So unfortunately, popular media is not looking beyond the 3 C's, crime, cricket, cinema. There's got to be space for other content. And, we'll be a pretty, funny society if we don't give due importance to this content. And hence the India Nonfiction Festival. I hope you'll have some good discussions. It's going to be an open platform. Feel free to ask questions to all our speakers. And thank you so much, all of you. Over to Suhasini, Haider now.
It's left to me just to introduce the topic. When we speak about words like the future is now, it sounds very catchy, but you think about it, what exactly does that mean? Isn't the future the future? Why should the future be now? But I think it's summed up by the idea that, in fact, whatever you're thinking about has probably already happened. And in this new world, which you have inherited now, in fact, anything you can think of is probably already happening somewhere in the world. So in that sense, the future is now. In 1980, I think, Ted Turner, the man who invented CNN, started with a very simple idea. He said, you can learn more in 24 hours than you can learn in 24 minutes. What did that mean at the time, in 1980, to think about the idea of 24-hour news television, that people could turn on a television at any time and get the news that was happening at the moment, was unheard of at a time when, in fact, even in the US, people didn't actually want to take more than 24 minutes of news. But he was thinking in terms of the future. About a year later, he gave a speech which he was criticized for, where he said that, in fact, people were no longer going to look to newspapers for the news. In fact, it was read as Ted Turner announces the end of newspapers. 30 years after that, I interviewed him, maybe more than 30 years after that, 30, 35 years after that. And I said, you were criticized for saying that, and newspapers are still around, people are still reading newspapers. And he said, I never said that. I said people will stop getting their news from the newspapers. The idea being that when there is something going on in the world, none of you in today's world are waiting for tomorrow morning's newspaper to tell you what is happening right now. You will probably read the newspaper in any case, because there's a lot more to be got. There's the fact of reading from a newspaper makes things much more easy to understand, perhaps. But in fact, you are getting the news from the internet, and in some small measure from your phones, from your television, and a lot of it is simply by word of mouth, by SMSs and that sort of thing. So the fact is that what Ted Turner said in 1980 has been proven, and he was able to say the future is now. That he was one of those people who was able to say the future is now, and those are the people who have left their mark in the world. Maybe many of you have not heard of Ted Turner, but I can assure you, all of you know what 24-hour television news is. And it's because of him. And we see it in every field, and that's the discussion today. I'm hoping that our participants will bring out their fields and what the future really means that is already affecting all of us. We see it in the economy. Every global trend today has an impact on us. You know, there are prices of a small commodity somewhere in Maharashtra which are being affected by the fact that the US and Iran weren't talking to each other, or that the US and Iran are now talking to each other. We certainly see it in the software sector. I remember a man called Devang Mehta saying in 1991, you know, speaking about an industry worth $50 billion, speaking about an industry that would put India on the map of the world. In 1991, India was not on that map, and now it seems almost it's almost a cliche, a stereotype in the U.S. that if you speak about software, you speak about India. These are all people who are able to say the future really is now. I see it so much in politics, where who would have thought even 2 years ago that there could be a third party, a third way, a party that's not coming from any old tradition, coming out there and actually giving a fight to the more entrenched political parties in your city. You're going to see an election next week which will have two new things in it. One, it'll have a completely new party that is standing for the first time and is in fact giving everybody else a run for their money if you go by the surveys. And you're going to see that idea that so far has not actually been put into practice, but the idea that that you may soon be able to say none of the above work for you. None of the contestants for an election is you think are good enough for you. And you might actually be able to see a completely different system emerge. There's a system of accountability, what electronic voting machines have brought in as well. And you see it in the way that politicians are having to respond. There are so many who were able to say, okay, the future is now. I know I'm going to be able to get through to people on social media. I know I'm going to be able to get through to people if I actually appear and speak to them. We're seeing for the first time, and I can tell you as a journalist, we're really seeing for the first time politicians wanting to come out and maybe pit their ideas against other people's ideas. It's something that hasn't happened before. In Mizoram this time, for the first time, all the three top parties had politicians take part in a public debate about their policies. Now, these are things that we always thought, America mein hota hai, you know, you see those presidential debates and things. But our politicians are behind that. But there are already people who are having to respond in different ways. One of them showing up in 3D virtual sets in various campaigns. There is definitely a sense that everyone is suddenly having to engage with that future, which is now. So you are seeing it in all these fields. We're seeing it in healthcare, we're seeing it in space, we're seeing it in public transport, in the fact that your cell phones today are soon going to be your wallet. They're already your portable television. You know, you see that ad on TV where a guy says, I've been robbed, and he says, what have you lost? And he says, well, I've lost, you know, my wallet, my credit cards, and I've lost my television as well. And he's saying, a television in your pocket? Now, the truth is that future is already here. In the media world, we totally understand that the future viewer is not going to tune in at a certain time to watch the news or tune in at a certain time to watch people. When they want to watch some content, they are going to watch it right then, right now. And that's much of what I hope our speakers will also speak to you about, is what is your future that is playing out right now. I think the biggest trend, though, perhaps, is in the way that we think. That future has already come upon us. In the last week, perhaps what has dominated the headlines is the story of an alleged sexual assault at a respected national magazine. The editor-in-chief has been accused. And to me, in the media, what has changed is our attitude to it. There are many I've met in the last week who looked at me and said, my God, who would have believed that this could be a story? Of course, this has been happening for the longest time, and of course, so and so and so and so, you know. That has gone. That future has changed because of your generation. That you are no longer saying, oh, because it's happened before, it's going to be okay, and it's going to go on without people talking about very, very important issues like sexual harassment. And, you know, there are all these grades. There's sexual harassment, there's sexual assault. There is the kind of outrage we saw after the gang rape in Delhi last year that brought cities to a stop. It's not a small thing. You know, it's easy to get cynical in hindsight and say, oh, it was 15 minutes of television for a lot of people. But the truth is, you did bring people out, and people who went away from what they would normally be doing to make that point. That's changing. It is no longer okay. And I think that's perhaps the silver lining in what would otherwise be a very dismal situation for many of us. When you think that, you know, year on year, nothing changes, attitudes don't change. The fact is that so many from your generation are already telling us that what you were thinking about has already gone by. And in fact, as the topic suggests today, the future is now. I'd like to start this discussion with asking Mr. Kiran Karnik to speak. For many of us, he's somebody who we look to for years as telling us what the future was going to be. Mr. Karnik?
Thank you, Suhasini, and thank you, Kumar, for putting this together and for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here this morning. I think this kind of thing, which looks at non-fiction and discussions about serious topics, is very, very useful. And I think Suhasini has set us off with a lot of thoughts and ideas on what we might talk about. I want to focus on one part of it, which I think is part of the future and part of our present. Doesn't normally figure in the big agenda in India. In India, as we all know, what's important is CPM. CPM, of course, is cricket, politics, and movies. But what I want to talk about is a little more about technology and where it interfaces with society, particularly in relation to the future. And the future is very important, not only because many of you are very young. The future is important because that's where we are all going to spend the rest of our lives. It's the future. And I want to look at what technology is doing in relation to society and just talk of a few specific areas where I think it is making an impact, needs to make an impact, can make an impact, and how policies and politics might and should influence it. The first, of course, I want to speak about the commonest one of all, which all of you probably have in your pockets, which is the mobile. And the kind of change it has brought about, which to me is truly revolutionary. I don't think we have fully grasped what it means, and I don't think we have given it the kind of attention it deserves, both in terms of what it's done, and equally importantly, maybe more importantly, in terms of what it can do. You know, a little device on which you can speak to your friends. It's not just a device on which you can send messages, and increasingly look, as Suhasini just said, at television also. It's become a device for mobilization. She mentioned what happened last year around the country, more visibly in Delhi, and a very large part of that was driven by the fact that you had a medium on which you could mobilize people. And I think the mobile, in many ways, it's very appropriate that, you know, you look at mobile and mobilization and the two sound similar, because it's become a fantastic tool for mobilizing people, something which was earlier done almost always only by political parties or in times gone by mass movements, which we've lost out on. And the mobilization process has gone, and therefore what is shared agenda, what drives people, what becomes important, is somehow spoken of either in drawing rooms or houses or not at all. And suddenly you have this device which is able to instantly mobilize people in large numbers who care about an issue and get them together. It allows them to share their concerns, of course share pictures, share messages. But I think it's become a device which is therefore going to change the very way in which politics happens in this country. Because today, unlike the past, you didn't need an organizing element. If it's visible in our country in a few cases like what we saw last year, or what we saw briefly at the peak of the anti-corruption Anna movement, you've seen that happening around the world, whether it's in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, or in Turkey, over an issue which was completely different. The fact is that you can use this to mobilize people without a structure, without a party, without a political or social organization. It's people who come together for an issue, for a cause, for something very specific, and then they may dissolve. They're not part of a formation, they're not paid for crowds, they're not trucked in or bussed in somewhere, they just come on their own. And I think this is truly a change that's going to be seminal in terms of how not just politics happens, but how society begins to organize itself in the world. The second one I want to mention is something which has made big news in the last few days, and those of you who kept up with it may know about it. Some of my younger friends here may not be as aware of it. It's something called a Bitcoin. This is what is referred to as virtual or digital currency. And unlike all other currencies in the world, this is one which is not controlled by any state. There's no country that controls this. There's no country that decides the exchange rate. There's no country that trades in it or tries to prop it up or keep it down. And it's becoming a commonly acceptable form, very slowly, of exchange and currency. It was used for various rather unsavory ways, and that's how it picked up a lot of momentum, which was for drug dealing, frankly. But somehow it's begun to gain acceptability and momentum around the world. Now imagine that, a currency, which is what we deal in to buy and sell things and goods, it's our very lifeline in many ways, a currency on which no state has control. What does it mean for the future? What does it mean for the world? What does it mean for globalization? What does it mean for our accepted structures of state, sovereignty, country? Suddenly it's all gone by. And how is this going to work? Frankly, we don't know. People have called it the new form of anarcho-capitalism. You know, it's a form of anarchy because it's not controlled by any structure. And it is capitalism because you're looking at where it does. And this is going to bring changes. Just as I mentioned, mobilization on the one hand, this is something which is so different and so huge that I don't think anybody, let alone the countries or the central banks who control currencies, know what it means. They're beginning to grapple with it. For a long time they ignored it. For a while they wanted to do away with it. Now they're beginning to realize that they have to deal with it and can't wish it away. I think this is the other big one. The third one I mentioned, globalization, is the very forces driving globalization. For many years, many people, particularly from my generation, used to worry about 15, 20 years back when satellite television made its first big forays into this country, that this globalization is going to mean the domination of one culture. And that culture, given the power of technology that they have, is going to be Western culture, by and large US culture, and some of it called it the new colonization, as in Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola, which is going to come and dominate us. But it's been the other way around. And I've seen this transition, as many of you have, from concerns about cultural domination by foreign channels. Today I'm hard-pressed to find a channel that shows anything but local stuff. When I want a music channel, I've great difficulty getting an English language music channel. All the ones which you thought of when I was growing up, like MTV, are all doing Hindi or Punjabi pop songs. Very good, shows what has happened. And of course, the best example of that is the Mek Aloo Tikki. A better example of globalization and the fact of how culture influences what broader things bring in. And you begin to see this slowly but surely in technology, how culture begins to affect technology. And you see it, of course, most visibly in the Indian predilection for getting maximum value out of anything, the utility factor, which is using a cell phone without paying. How do you do that? You make a missed call. All of us know what a missed call is. People outside this country don't know what a missed call is. It's amazing. And now that's taken to the next stage where the missed call is being used as a way for mobilization. You make a missed call to a number, they'll call you back and give you inputs and tell you what's happening where and a whole host of other stuff. So you're beginning to see how these factors which are helping to globalize are also being attenuated, amplified, and moderated in some ways by cultural factors. I don't want to dwell more on that, but you begin to see where some of that is heading as you go down the road. In India, I want to mention just a couple of other things before I end about how things are beginning to change here. New venture here is the unique ID, Aadhaar. Lots of things for and against, but it's going to change the way we do things. It's going to change it because already it's been a huge force for financial inclusion, where having a UID number enables you to open a bank account without proof of address, proof of residence, which people who live, as I like to say, on the drain pipe on the Western Expressway in Bombay, when the bank asks them, you want to open your account, what's your address? And the guy says, pipe number 4, Western Expressway near Malad. No bank's going to open an account. Now with this Aadhaar card, he can do just that. He doesn't need proof of residence, proof of address, no ration card, no gas connection, no telephone connection, just open an account. Revolutionary. Lots of other things with the UID. Lots of concerns too, which I'll come to in a moment. And I think that's going to be one big driver as we go forward. The other one is going to be in terms of what we are seeing and have seen with regard to things like WikiLeaks and what the Snowden revelations have shown. That as information becomes more widespread, as things get more and more murky, there are going to be people who are going to be able to tap into those both negatively and positively. We saw the negative part on the Snowden episode where, you know, the US NSA was tapping into everybody's phone, mine and yours for sure, but also dignitaries who are rather offended by what's been done now. They shouldn't be surprised because their own countries do it, but that's a different story. Our country does it, which is why we've been muted in our expression of unhappiness, because we're doing it all the time, legally, illegally, as we know from a recent so-called Snoopgate case. But that apart, it's giving new power both ways. One, power to the states to keep you under continuous surveillance, but also in some ways, the fact that somebody else can tap into it and expose that is giving a new power to individuals and to civil society. How this equation is going to work out, you know, we can discuss for a long time, but it's going to be something that again is going to change equations. The fact that information about you is widely available, maybe publicly, which is quite scary, but also that you can equally, thanks to some formal legislation like the Right to Information Act, but also without that, tap into information which is privy only to the government, and somebody's going to leak it somewhere. Now that's going to be changing the whole balance of power, the balance and equations that happen in our society. And I think that's something else we need to look for. Finally, just some concerns. I mentioned UID, I mentioned all this tapping, and the whole concerns around the world about terrorism. And now everybody in all governments around the world, including our own, uses it as a cover to do whatever they want. So you can tap somebody's phone and say, national interest, public safety, and there's no way you can counter it, and most individuals accept it. Today, all the intrusive kinds of things we see are more and more accepted because nobody dares to speak against them, because somebody somewhere who says, I know more than you, tells you, no, it's to take care of any terrorism that might affect you. And of course, somehow we are more concerned about certain places than others. So of course, the airports are very tightly guarded and very secure with cameras on the way, in the way, 5 checks before you get an aircraft. When you get on a train, it's much simpler. There's some attempt to do something, but nothing more. So presumably train passengers are less valuable than airline passengers, and train property is less important than airports. But that's the reality of the world. But that apart, I think you're going to see a whole new area of increasing and acceptable surveillance. Unfortunately, the countries that many people took as examples of democracy and freedom, which is by and large the Western democracies, have been way ahead on this. And today, whenever anything is done in any other country, you point to them and say, they're doing it too, you know, and they're supposed to be ahead of us. So I think it's a bit scary on where this so-called invasion of privacy, both at the level of the individual and at a wider societal level, is going. But it's something that technology is unfortunately facilitating, is also exposing, but is facilitating. And again, I think the jury is out on this one. We don't know where it's going to head. I expect that in a few years there'll be a backlash and we see some correction on this over-concern with surveillance, with terrorism, with protecting you and yet not protecting you. So I think it's something that we need to look at. And the final point to close all this is the concern, looking at all this technology and what effect it's having on society, is what kind of society do we want? I don't think that today we have a clear picture when we look at political parties whom we vote for, and Suhasini mentioned the elections and very rightly pointed to a new option, a third option in Delhi, and a fourth option of saying none of the above, the so-called Nota option. And yet, you know, I don't think we have a clear picture of any of the political parties projecting what is the society that they want the country to live in. Implicitly, some are for efficiency and faster growth. Implicitly, some talk of being, you know, pro-poor and socially good. But what does it mean? What is your picture of the society you live in? What is the extent of freedom, democracy, empowerment? All words that are used, but there's no clarity on how and where. And I do think we need to begin to use all these tools of technology, the ability to connect with each other, to begin to define for ourselves what is the society we want to live in. And then, as I mentioned overall in terms of policies, what are the policies that can help to shape those? And I think that connection is somewhat weak. And the connection between that and technology is particularly weak. Technology can do all kinds of things. The kind cruelty of the surgeon's knife, as many of you would remember from your Wren and Martin figures of speech examples, I think technology is like that. And we've got to decide how it is to be used and policies that will make its use positive or negative. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Karnik, for really painting that picture of the future and putting those very real checks and balances for us to think about. Our next speaker is really someone who can take exactly what Mr. Karnik ended on, is that what is the kind of society that our political parties want to envision for our society. And Mr. Pavan Varma is certainly himself a symbol of the future that is now. He's a thinker, a writer, a diplomat, all of those things, and then has chosen to go into a field that many would not have associated with all of those, into politics. Mr. Pavan Varma?
What a good idea it is to have a non-fiction festival. Not that I am against fiction, but often it becomes somewhat the underdog in a literary festival. And I think it's important because there are serious issues to discuss. There is a link between today and the kind of country and society we are going to live in tomorrow. There's a link. There is an assumption that irrespective of our individual contribution, change will come about in accordance with what we believe that change should be. That is mythology. It does not happen. It can happen, but it's not the most desirable way for it to happen, because the key point I want to make in this short intervention is the time has come for this audience, largely, if not entirely from the middle class, to start to ask itself, we want a future which we believe we are entitled to. What are we going to do about it? It's as simple as that. There was a time when those from the middle class, those who were educated, were considered an irrelevant periphery to change in the country. 20 years ago, you talk to politicians and politicians would say, भाई है यार वो बोलते बहुत हैं और वोट करने तो आधे भी नहीं आते हैं. Their number is not significant. They don't constitute a tactically constituted bloc. Their numbers are not significant. We have our caste and electoral arithmetic. They matter. Now what has changed? Obviously, something has changed because, as I wrote in a recent column in the Times of India, there is a new preoccupation with the Indian middle class. And what has changed is that over a period of time, the size of the middle class, which in 1996 was 25 million, if you took a criteria of any household, anybody belonging to a household where the monthly income is between 20,000 to rupees 1 lakh. If you take that as a criteria relevant to India, in 1996 it was 26 or 25 million. Today it is close to 170 million, and the projection is that by 2015 it will be approaching 300 million. Now look at this. You are all part of it. Here is a class, a critical mass now. 275 million people, pan-Indian in scope, educated, similar aspirations, similar expectations, similar angsts, similar levels of aspiration. Here is a class now dispersed across India whose potential has qualitatively changed by two things, including one that Kiran ji spoke about. First is instant connectivity. There are 694 million mobile subscribers in India, or something like that. Every one of you has a mobile. There is instant connectivity. More and more of you are using the social media, which again guarantees instant connectivity. And the second factor is 24/7, what Suhasini referred to, 24/7 electronic media, where all of you at one point or the other are watching the similar unfolding of news, if not on the same channels, then on other channels, with the capacity to switch channels, and therefore when you communicate, you are on the same page. Now, if after this you tell me that we are only capable of anger alienation, not because of me, if we are only capable of anger, we are only capable of being alienated, we are only capable of being disillusioned, we are only capable of abusing, and we have no other role now in order to build the future we want tomorrow, you are both devaluing your own potential and, I'm afraid, providing an excuse that doesn't wash today. That is why I tell not only the young but other people from this class, engagement. You must get engaged with issues because today you have the strength to contribute. And when I see young people who are vaguely in a diffuse way angry with everything, and then I ask them, what change do you want? On governance, on democracy, on the functioning of democracy, on corruption, what change do you want? You want to build that future, you have a stake in it. There is no one who has a higher stake in it than you do. What is your knowledge of issues? What are the three things you want to change as far as electoral reform goes? What is the reason for continued criminalization in politics? Why is there no financial transparency in the link of blank money and politics? Which law needs to change? Are you aware of it? There are many people who paradoxically, because of the saturation of electronic media news, don't even read a newspaper. And therefore what happens is that your world becomes one which is combustible in terms of your desire for change, but you are crippling yourself in your ability to contribute to that change. अरे भाई थोड़ा पढ़ तो लीजिए, थोड़ा अध्ययन तो कर लीजिए, थोड़ा स्टडी तो कर लीजिए. इकबाल की एक लाइन है, रहजन कहते हैं जो लूटता है, रहबर होता है जो लीडरशिप प्रोवाइड करता है. तो इकबाल कहते हैं, तू इधर उधर की न बात कर, तू बता कि काफिले क्यों लुटे. मुझे रहजनों से गरज नहीं, लिटोरों से गरज नहीं, तेरी रहबरी का सवाल है. Your leadership, where is it? So what I want to say is, either you become engaged in a manner which is substantive. There are issues. There are issues on governance, on democracy and its functioning, on corruption, on the need to take development to the grassroots because, and that's the other critique I want to make, today all of us who are concerned about the future have an exceptionally narrow definition of that future as if it only concerns the issues which concern us. भाई आप लोग से ज्यादा लोग इस देश में हैं, more than your entire number of the young who can't read and write. India has the world's largest population of people who can't read and write. India has the world's largest number of children who are malnutrition, more than sub-Saharan Africa. India has the largest number of those who are unacceptably and abjectly poor. वो भी तो आपके दायरे में आए ना कभी सोच में, because it is fantasy to believe that you can build the first floor of a house without the ground floor. So ultimately you cannot serve your interest unless you begin to see the future as something larger than your own worlds. So when Jessica Lal happens, and that was the first time, because I have written a book called The Great Indian Middle Class, when Jessica Lal happens and when there is a travesty of justice, when someone who killed her in front of dozens of witnesses goes scot-free, the middle class organizes itself. Candlelight vigils, resident welfare associations come out, and it's a good thing. The decision was reversed. But rapes are happening across the country in rural areas. Are you concerned? People are dying of hunger, farmers are committing suicide. Is the middle class concerned, or is its future something by which you can put it in your pocket and secede from India and call it the Republic of my world only? Nahi hoga na. So you have to broad base your agenda. During Anna Hazare's movement, there was the middle class, it was mobilized. But there is also required a revolution in our own thinking to morality. Most of our morality today, because you want to build a future which is ethical, most of our morality for the middle class is outrage over corruption in higher places, compromise as far as morality goes in our personal world. पुलिसमैन ने रोका, 100 रुपए पकड़ाए, चालान कटवा के आगे चले, अपना कोई काम हुआ कर दिया, and then says, "Ab, there's too much corruption in India." We need to hold a mirror to ourselves. Today you cannot divorce your individual contribution and its potential from the future of India. And if you don't therefore so get engaged, if you don't get so engaged, I am afraid this potential, in order to have the future which not only you deserve but India deserves, you are going to become cannon fodder for politicians. वो होता है ना कठपुतली, स्ट्रिंग्स किसी और के हाथ में होती हैं और पपेट्स नाचते हैं, और वो सब आप एजुकेटेड लोग बनने वाले हैं कि कोई आएगा वो बोलेगा, बात पर वहां जुबान कटती है, वो कहें और सुना करे कोई. No dialogue, not an engaged and informed dialogue, not a dialogue where you are informed, you have studied the issues, you have an alternative vision where you are able to question, interrogate, ask the right questions, have an agenda of your own. ऐसे थोड़ा ना चलता है. तो अगर आप नहीं करेंगे तो कोई अच्छा स्पीकर आएगा आपके सामने, ऑलरेडी यू आर वेरी एंग्री विद एवरीथिंग दैट इज रॉन्ग टुडे, एंड ही विल, जैसे वो प्लास्टिसिन को लेते हैं ना, वैसे आपको जिस तरह की मूर्ति चाहते हैं बना देगा. सो देयरफॉर आई से टू यू, we have to engage anger, alienation, unless it is organized, unless it is sustained, unless it has informed leadership, will be subverted, subsumed, derailed by the establishment. And that future will not happen. But gussa andar se, when linked to participation, to awareness, to information, then it becomes a force. Then the future is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, Pavan Varma never disappoints when it comes to just getting the crowd to understand a very, very, what one would think of as an arcane idea, but the idea that it is that leadership that is required. It's not enough to be able to be part of the angry crowd over there. I am going to ask Dipankar Gupta, and Dr. Dipankar Gupta, of course, is going to also have to play the role of the concluder. You're going to have to sum up a lot of what we have spoken about today. While he's speaking, I also want all of you to think about questions, because we have been given at least 10 minutes extra at the end of our session to take questions from all of you. So think about the questions and who you'd like to ask them to, and we'll try and take a few of them after. Dr. Gupta.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be on this panel, and indeed it's a wonderful thing that you've organized a festival of non-fiction. It was mentioned some time back that I'd written several books, and they were in sociology and social anthropology and the likes. And I did mention to a friend of mine, rather pensively, that one day I hope to write a fiction. And this friend of mine, believe me, is a good friend of mine. He turns around and says, "I believe you've been writing fiction all along anyway." And that was a bit of a put-downer. But one day, perhaps, I will be able to write a work of fiction. But in the meantime, let us celebrate non-fiction. And I think the topic today is very interesting because it really forces us to think of the future in a fashion which is not just time, but what do we want to do about the future? When India was fighting for independence, the big question that we all had in our minds is, who are we? And lots of books were written. Even the freedom fighters were very concerned about that question. And who are we? Are we Aryans? Are we not Aryans? Are we Hindus? Do we belong to the geographical territory called India? Or is there a cultural bond that brings us together? How scientific were we? How advanced were we? And things of that sort. After we became independent, that issue died because we're now quite confident. We know who we are. Now the question is, what are we? And all kinds of theories came up, including in anthropology and social sciences and sociology too. Are we rural? Are we urban? Are we industrial? What kind of castes dominate our thinking, or at least caste ideology? Is there religious tension? So the question was, what are we? And I think we've done quite a fair amount of studies on that. We know a fair amount of things about what we are. And today the question really is, where do we want to be? I think that is the future. If you talk to anybody now and you say that who are we or what are we, that will not really get a rise out of them. If you want them to really get engaged and want to blow their hair back, the question you must ask is, where are we going? What are we doing? And of course, there's technology, and technology has done a lot. And what Kiran Karnik said is absolutely on the button, because you cannot think of a future today when you do not factor in technology. In other words, you cannot be blind to technology and its many innovative skills. It's impossible. So in today's day and age, technology is a very important factor. And then I come to what Pavan just talked about, leadership. Now, technology without leadership is absolutely rudderless. You have to have a leader out there who is guiding technology, taking it forward. I mean, you can dye your hair and put a curl on your forehead, but you will step out and the gust of breeze just knocks it all back. Not only do you look pretty odd, but it's a bad hair day for all of us. So that is why I think it's very important for leadership to be in the forefront, because leaders, after all, are very, very important. Pavan did talk about the middle class and the fact that the middle class really counts. And I think when I put Pavan's work and Kiran's argument together, I think that I really don't have much to say. My plan A and plan B have been taken care of. I am reduced to plan C. And the plan C is simply this, that if you want to take democracy forward, if you want to make technology work, then you must really pay attention to both democracy and technology. If there are ills of technology, and we all know there are ills of technology, and these ills of technology can only be solved by technology itself. If there are problems with democracy, they can only be solved by democracy itself. You know, from the 1950s to the late last decade of the 20th century, we were all embroiled in this Cold War debate. It was capitalism versus communism, and democracy didn't matter very much. If you were on my side, then you may have maybe a certified killer, but you were a Democrat. You believed in capitalism. If you were other side and you were a mass murderer, it didn't really matter because you were for communism. Who talked about democracy? Nobody did. Which is why today, when we discuss democracy, we have a sense of alienation. Does it really count? I've met so many people in our country saying that it is democracy that has made a mess of our affairs. We need to get back to some kind of dictatorship. But, you know, that's not the way it goes. If you ask yourself, all that you cherish in life, all the good things that have happened to you, they happened to you because you are in some ways inheriting the legacies of democracy. It's democracy that has made you efficient. It's democracy that's given you industrialization. It's democracy that's given you the choice to do what you want to do. And it's this that has taken you forward. It's democracy that has given you really all the scope and headwind you need to go ahead, to go forward. And today we turn around and say, well, you know, democracy is holding us back. It's not letting us actually develop and flourish. And I think that's because we don't pay attention to the kernel of democracy. And the kernel of democracy is not technology, advancing technology. It is not a growing number of people who have cars. The kernel of democracy is fraternity. And if you don't have fraternity in place, you can never really advance. If you ask yourself, what are the three major issues which democracy has managed to give us over the last 100 years? And the three things that will strike you between your eyes. One is universal health, universal education, and housing urban policy. These three things democracy really finessed and perfected by the time we came around in 1952-53. After that, very little has really happened, and that is because I believe the Cold War just subsumed us. We couldn't think straight. Now, Babasaheb Ambedkar, who all of us know and admire and revere, I don't care too much about what he did as a sociologist and stuff like that, as a historian, but I am completely overwhelmed by his contribution to the making of our Constitution, in which I think he was just a shining star. There's no parallel to him. And the way he thought things out was so acute. He said that by law, I can legislate by law liberty, I can say liberty by law, I can say equality by law, but I cannot legislate fraternity. That is something that I have to nurture and grow. I have to develop it. It's a very delicate plant. It has to be hothoused and looked after, which is why I say democracy is not easy. And if you think democracy is easy, think again. Democracy is pretty tough. It's not something you pack into lunchbox and take to office. It's something you have to work on all the time. Because once you take your eyes off the ball, something else creeps in that takes democracy off. Why is that so? Because fraternity is a very difficult ethic to live by. What is easy? What is easy is ethnicity. What is easy is racism. What is easy is monarchy. What is easy is dictatorship. But what is tough is democracy. And democracy is the most contrived social institution you can ever imagine. Never before in history has democracy been tried out. This is the first time it's happening, and let us not let the side down. So if you want to really make democracy work, think fraternity. If you think fraternity, you think universal education. You think universal health. You think of urban policy and housing. That is why fraternity is so important. But fraternity doesn't come easy. You can't say, I need for democracy a mirror that reflects reality. If you need a mirror that reflects reality, you will not take democracy forward. As Bertolt Brecht once said about art, art doesn't need a mirror to reflect reality as much as it needs a hammer to shape that darned reality. And I think that is what we need. In democracy too, we don't need a mirror to reflect reality. If democracy was all about reflecting reality and of needs that people feel, I have no time for democracy. If democracy is all about votes, I have no time for democracy. I have time for democracy when democracy thinks fraternity. And when you think fraternity, you always think in terms of using a hammer. Ask yourself, why is Mahatma Gandhi looked up to even today all over the world? It's because of what he did in India in his fight against untouchability. He did many other things, but this is something that is absolutely central, which is the signature tune of Mahatma Gandhi, if one would use that term. It is not in a glossy wrapper, but it's there. Now just imagine, Mahatma Gandhi wanted to reflect reality. He went around here with the paper and pen and said, you guys, do you want untouchability or not? I can tell you in those days, people would have said, let untouchability stay. But Mahatma Gandhi went against the tide. He did not reflect reality. He used a hammer to shape reality and said, untouchability must go. And that's how he took democracy forward. He imagined a fraternity and made it happen. When Jawaharlal Nehru was discussing the Hindu marriage bill, did he ask Hindu men, do you want to be polygamous or monogamous? And every Hindu male said, polygamy is a darn good thing. Let's go on with it. But he said no. He went against the tide. There were people in his party who were saying, go slow on this. But he went ahead and did it. He didn't reflect reality. He had a hammer, and he used that hammer to shape reality. Today, unfortunately, most politicians want to reflect reality, and then they tell us that you are middle class, you're this, that, and the other, you're small in number, something that Pavan just said. They beat us with it all the time. And I'm sick and tired of that, because I know, when I look at the history of democracy, I know for a fact, I'm absolutely certain, that whatever progress democracy made over the last 100 years was not by reflecting reality, but because leaders came to the forefront and said, we are going to shape reality. This is from the abolition of child labor, to women's rights, to minority rights, to universal health, to universal education. On every front, there were leaders who stood out and said, we are willing to go against the tide, we are willing to risk our political careers. In fact, many of them even lost their seats. Robert Peel, for example, he fought against the Corn Law. His prime ministership was gone, but he came back. Disraeli's cabinet was full of crusty conservatives, but he is the one who did this fantastic thing, the Reform Act. I mentioned to you about Nehru, I mentioned to you about Gandhi. There's so many other historical personalities who initiated education, initiated urban health, and they did all of this, by the way, not when the countries were rich, but when these countries were poor. In 1933, Sweden was so poor, and today Sweden is, of course, the most enviable country in the world. But Sweden was so poor in 1933, it couldn't feed 1 million people. In fact, there are more Swedes now in Minnesota in America than there are in Sweden, because they all went there. And at that time, Sweden started the Falkenhammett program. In 1946-47, Britain NHS. 1945 in Canada, Saskatchewan was so poor, it was then that they started the universal health in Canada, which has now become a wonderful, wonderful program. Austria, post-First World War, very, very poor. Basque country in Spain, very poor till Franco, as long as Franco was alive. After Franco, they moved ahead. When they were very poor, they taught fraternity. When India was very poor in 47, Ambedkar taught fraternity. Somewhere along the line, we've given up fraternity for pragmatism. What can be done? how easy it is to get things done, how difficult that is. When I sing this song to many politicians, they always, by and large, come up with this argument, but will this get me votes? It is so difficult. We are a poor country, and I keep insisting upon the fact that in poor countries, these things were done. That is how they became rich. For example, you don't do corporate social responsibility once you're rich. In factories, in organizations, in enterprises. You do corporate social responsibility in order to get rich. And that is the best way to do it. Most people think corporate social responsibility is a flab that you are able to accumulate because you're rich, and now you can shed that flab by CSR and stuff like that, go about digging a well or starting a school. But in fact, if you're a marathon runner, you will do CSR from the first day. In fact, if you want democracy to work, you will think fraternity from the first day, which is why I say leaders are very important. Without leaders, you cannot make democracy. Leaders must go against the tide. The future is in leaders, and we must produce leaders now. Walt Whitman once said, produce great men, the rest will follow. And I believe that he was right. He was absolutely right. But the principle of citizenship is what is central to fraternity. And T.H. Marshall has said, citizenship confers an equality of status upon which structures of inequality may be built. But first of all, equality of status, that is health, housing, education. We have a growing middle class. That is true. At the same time, we also find in terms of deliverables, we are just going lower and lower every day. 39 million people, this is a very conservative figure from Lancet, 39 million people go into poverty every year because of medical reasons. We've also found from a number of studies that kids who are in class 3, who are in class 8 cannot do what class 3 kids can do. And yet, look at the aspiration. In 1980, 2% of Indian kids went to private schools. Today, in 2010, the study that was done shows that 21% of rural kids and 51% of urban kids are going to private schools. Why? Because they are full of aspirations. They want something to happen. And the children very often, and parents very often who are very, very poor, they tighten their belts and go on tightening their belts till just about a buckle left because they want the children to get education. And I don't think any parent should make that kind of sacrifice, but these parents are making that sacrifice. Village Indians are not looking at the village anymore. They're looking towards the cities. Villages, in fact, are not villages either in the old-fashioned way. There's so much non-rural activity taking place in rural India. And today, if you look at rural India and you say it's the old-fashioned village, you're completely wrong. And what do you find? You find people in rural India who are looking over the mud walls, trying to pick up a signal that will take them away from this boring village to an exciting slum. And that is the future they're looking at. But should we be happy with that? Should leaders think differently? Shouldn't leaders say that there is something called citizenship, and there's something called fraternity, and you and I should be able to exchange places? Isn't intersubjectivity important? And unless we provide universal health and universal education, unless all of this is put on the table as something to be discussed and talked about, we will never get ahead with the future. What we will do is we'll muddle along and say future is time. We will not say future is project. And we must think in those terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dipankar, for summing up so many of these issues, because there's the troubling side of the future that you have to keep engaging with, especially if you want to lead any kind of change. I'd like to thank all our speakers. They've been extremely inspiring. I've got, sort of pages just dotted with notes from so much of what they've said. I quickly want to take a few questions, if it's possible, if we've got a little time. Any hands up? Go ahead.
My first question is to Mr. Karnik, because he talked about the Aadhaar and UID, and I've been talking about it to a lot of experts about it, especially the very well-known economist, Mr. John Dress, who is completely against the idea, who believes is actually an act of formal surveillance on part of the government. So just I wanted to take you on that part. How do you respond to these accusations by these experts? And the second question is about social media, because today we are talking about using social media as a tool for change. But I just thought today, instead of tool, it has become a toy. Because J.L. Baird, the founder of, inventor of television, he once said that, had I known what this television would have done, I would have probably not invented it. I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg would say the same thing. So the question is, had social media become like the snake eating its own tail? Because I see my own friends being more interested in sharing as cute cat photos on a social media than actually being interested in how we can use it and take it forward. So I would like to take it on that front. So Mr. Varma, if you can respond to that, sir.
Very briefly, I mentioned the concerns about privacy and what it means in terms of what you can do, because the UID, everything becomes traceable. But end of the day, it's a difficult one. I feel very strongly about it, and I'm greatly concerned. I can tell you about how you protect that. But end of the day, when you look at the trade-off, as somebody told me very rightly, he says, look, your concern is a very middle-class concern about your privacy. To a poor person who has no privacy, what this does is amazing. It's truly revolutionary, the fact that you can do this. The second is in terms of making sure that leakages and corruption is minimized. And I don't want to get into a long story on direct benefits transfer, but I think there's enough evidence from around the world that if you can get money directly into a person's bank account, which the UID will facilitate, it's of huge benefit to those who are disadvantaged. So there is a trade-off. We need to be wary about it. We need to take on board privacy concerns and build strong laws that protect those which don't exist today. But overall, I think net, it's positive. On the social media, I think Suhasini is the best one to answer that one. I have lots of views, but she should be the one to respond to that.
Well, the truth is, the cute cat is a problem until the cute cat takes over other things. My own sense has always been when there are important issues happening, and this is true of 24/7 news as well, when important issues happen, issues that change the world, 9/11 happens, Mumbai happens, but also elections and all the rest, you will not find the cute cat on either the social media or dominating the social media or the television. I think the question was for you.
No, first of all, your question is good, but it's irrelevant now. Because no one can turn back the time. Social media is here to stay. It's exactly the same with television. So the option is not there. But it's a good question because all instruments are valid to the extent that you make good use of them. And the picture is not black and white. It's not either or. Please use the social media to share a joke, and if possible, send it to me also. But use it also for the empowerment it provides you. Who has not used Google when you are searching for a fact? Why don't you float a petition listing out 4 areas of electoral reform and raise 1 million signatures and we'll send them to the President of India? Use the internet. It's possible.
I would be honored if any one of you could answer this for me, because this is something that necessarily my mother has forced me to ponder on. Is it not guilt or greed that makes us act for anything? On the Rwanda, Congo, and the UN equation, it was guilt after the genocide that they did not butt into the Rwanda and Congo equation. In India, it's greed. It's guilt. It's any one of those two. So I would really just like to ask if, like Sir raised a question, that we do need to, introspect and see what we want, maybe after when we know what the society also wants out of us. To serve our interests, we need to serve everyone else's. Again, that too is inspired by greed to an extent.
Well, thank you very much for your question. I think you're very lucky to have a mother like that to inspire this question in you. When you talked about guilt and greed, you see in both these cases, you're actually reacting, And my argument is that if you're going to react in that fashion, or if you're going to give in to primal instincts like greed, which is also a kind of reaction, then you're not going to take democracy very far. Guilt and greed is there. One can account for it and put it aside. The best way to combat both these evils, I think both of them are evil. I don't think it's good to be guilty, because that doesn't help you really very much. You must know what is wrong and what is right. And to know what is wrong and what is right, you need to put citizenship in the forefront. And as I told you earlier, it's very easy to pervert citizenship and to think of, and make it unusable, unworkable, indeed even unfashionable. But the best thing to do is to always charge democracy with utopias. Today, we don't think of utopia in democracy. And, when you think of something big, they say, oh, you're an idealist. And that is what is wrong. There's nothing wrong in being an idealist. See, the old-fashioned utopia were utopias that were never approachable, never workable. But now we see utopias that are workable, and you must try and attain those. Incidentally, if a democracy is not charged with utopias, from time to time, it is not as if things stay the same. In fact, dystopia sets in. A negative thing happens. It's not as if you're all there. It's like an enterprise. If you're not constantly inventing yourself, you cannot stand in one place. You go down. Likewise, a democracy must constantly invent. Who thought in the mid-19th century or early 20th century that minority rights should be there? Who thought of women's right to vote? Who thought of these things? Nobody thought of them. It is leaders who excavated the riches that democracy hides under this muck, and pulls it out and says, here, look at it. So this is what you must do. This is why I think that we must be very utopian in our vision of democracy. We must think big, and we must not let the past and not let greed take over. In fact, the best thing that history could do is to tell you that the past is irrelevant. The only thing good about the past is that it shows quite clearly that great people also have feet of clay.
How relevant is white torture as a means of punishment? Like they put the criminals in a white room and then they say that, it's like a substitute for capital punishment. We want to transfer.
That's a very deep question. Is there a particular context to it?
Yeah, I was, I'm pretty much against capital punishment.
Okay.
And then there are people that there is a substitute for it. It's whatever you call it, white torture.
All right, that is one level of the discussion. I'm not sure we can get a real answer to that. But I think Mr. Varma does want to respond on the greed versus guilt question.
No, I wanted to say to you, again, the or is not necessary. Societies change and there can be elements of both guilt and greed. You can feel guilty that there are so many people who are deprived in your country. You can feel guilty that you step out of a Pizza Hut and there are people sleeping on the pavement. The real problem is that we are not feeling any guilt at all. Foreigners tell me that they are amazed that Indians don't notice poverty anymore. When they go out, they see the poor. Indians have stopped seeing them. If we start feeling guilty, it would be very good. Please feel guilty. And as far as greed is concerned, if you change the word to expectation, all change happens because the individual cannot be divorced from the kind of future he is building. Let's not all become unrealistic idealists. भाई अपना भी फायदा उसी में है जब मुल्क का, कौम का, देश का फायदा होगा. So you can have a bit of greed in that garb of expectation. Nothing wrong.
Well, it's about torture and capital punishment. And I think your point is well taken, because if you look at capital punishment from the optic of citizenship, there is so much wrong with it. Because just put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and should that person actually be not guilty and is going to be hanged anyway, it's not a kind of democracy that wears bells on its legs and announces itself. Obviously not. So I do feel that you will be able to get more out of prison reform, more out of legal interaction, if you put citizenship in the middle. How should police interact with citizens? What can citizens expect as a basic right? These are things that are very, very important. Coming to which I think links to the earlier question of guilt and greed. For example, if you are overwhelmed by guilt alone and not citizenship, what will you do? You'll think of handouts, right? In other words, you'll say that let's have health for the poor, let's have education for the poor. Let's not think universal health, universal education, but for the poor. And what does that end up as being? Poor health and poor education. Don't let guilt overwhelm you. It's very, very wrong. And neither should you let things like capital punishment and so forth, which are actually a manifestation of guilt, take over without putting citizenship in the center where you and I should be able to trade places. So I am on death row, but I haven't done anything. I didn't do it. The butler did it, but I'm on the death row, and it's just not fair. And that comes to you very clearly only when you think citizenship. Never when you think only of guilt, or should I do it, shouldn't I do it. Never in terms of morality, but only when you think in terms of intersubjectivity and trading places.
Listen, I'd like to thank all our speakers, Kiran, Karnik, Pavan, Varma, Dipankar, Gupta. And I think all of you have been very privileged to have listened to the ideas this morning. And I think, like me, you are all going to walk out if you're feeling a little more uplifted, a little more inspired to go out there and to think a little harder about what we do.